All right. Well, I guess moving right along to our next awesome speaker, and the man, the myth, the legend, as we all know him, the great Brian Westbrook. So put your hands together. Brian.
How is everybody?
Good.
I know you can do much better than that. I know it's a Saturday morning and everything's going on. The weather, geez, the weather's horrible. How's everybody doing today? Well, again, my name is Brian Westbrook, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Coalition for Life here in St. Louis, Missouri, and it's an honor and privilege to be here on our 11th 40 Days for Life campaign here in St. Louis. I'd like to start today with just a bit of a story. Once upon a time, there was a man who was running an organization, and this organization was doing really well. And over the course of the last 10 years or so, but then they had hit kind of a rough spot in their life. Can we turn this down just a little bit? They hit about a rough spot in their organization, and they were really struggling as to how they could grow this organization and get past this rough spot that they're in. And so this man, he started to put together a speech. He was going to gather all of his employees together and give them a really great speech and prove to them that it's one person that can make the whole difference in the world. And so he decided he would sit down in his study at home and write this speech because he was going to deliver it later that day. Well, as he was writing down his speech and getting ready, his wife knocks on his study door and says, "Hey, by the way, I'm going to go and run a few errands. Could you watch our 7-year-old son for us while you're doing your speech?" And he says, "Yes, dear." And so he reluctantly said yes. And so he kind of shut the door and said, "Oh, go ahead and play, and as I write my speech." Well, sure enough, as any young child would, knocks on the door a couple minutes later and says, "Dad, I'm bored." And he says, "Well, okay, fine. Well, we'll play a little bit together." So he's doing his speech off to the side while he's kind of tossing toys at his boy and then speech off to the side. Has anyone ever done this before? I certainly have. And so finally, after a couple of hours, he says, "Well, geez, this isn't working. I'm not getting my speech done, and I'm certainly not serving my child the way I certainly should." And so he decided he would put his speech to the side, and he would grab a magazine, flip through the pages, and he found the map of the world in this magazine. And so he decided that he would shred this up in dozens of pieces and scatter it all across the room. And he said, "Son, if you can get the world back together, then I'll give you $20. And his sons, who certainly had a toy that he wanted to buy, and he only needed $20 more to buy that toy. And so his son started scurrying around and trying to get it back together, but the man, he said, my son has no idea what the world of the map, or the map of the world looks like. No idea. This buys me at least 2 more hours. And so he goes back to his study to finish his speech. And just 5 minutes later, there's a knock on the door. Knock, knock, knock. And he opens it up, and there is his son with the map of the world already put back together. And he says, "Son, I was supposed to be doing my speech here." And he says, How did you do it? As he's pulling his wallet out to give him the $20. And he says, "Dad, I had no idea what the map of the world ever looked like. I really didn't know. But as I was gathering the pieces, I saw that on the back there was a man that I recognized. And so I put a sheet of paper down, and as I was putting it together, I put the man together. And I put another sheet of paper on top, and I flipped it over, and there was the man." And so his son looked at him and said, "I suppose if I got the man right, I could get the world right." And as the man looked at his son, he says, "You're right, and you just gave me my speech for tonight." And so, as we look at our world, if you get the man or the woman right, you get the world right. And so there's different ways that we can make that happen here in our local community. There's 4 different ways I would encourage you to go out, to evangelize, to pray, and to study, and to be there for different people. And the number one thing you need to do is pray. Because God Almighty is going to be the number one person who's going to end abortion here in our local community. He's going to be the one who can change this entire world. But we must be obedient to His will. And it's not about praying. Well, most of us around this community will pray whenever there's hardship, or whenever we want something, or, hey, guess what? They have a new iPad. I praise God, please, I want a new iPad, right? That's not quite the way God is asking us to pray. He's asking us to be consistent in our prayer. So I don't know what that consistency might look like for you. Maybe it's every morning you have a chair in the corner and you pray to God at one chair for 10 minutes. Or maybe you take the 15 minutes that you read in the Times and you take 10 of those and you read the Eternities instead. Or maybe you spend some time with your children at night and pray with them in the evening on a consistent basis. Or maybe if you're Catholic, it means that if you go to Mass every day in the morning. Maybe. But every single one of you is different, but what I'm asking for is a consistent level of prayer every single day. And it is through that consistency, through that alignment with God, that He can change you and thus change the world. The second thing I'd like you to do is to study. If you don't know God right, if you don't know the pro-life position correctly, if you don't know the legislation correctly, you cannot go out and change the world. Because they will challenge you in your faith, they will challenge your pro-life views, and you know that they're right, but why? Why are they right? Do you have the data? Do you have the backup to be able to articulate your pro-life convictions every single day? So how do you do this? How do you find this information? Well, number one, you go to Planned Parenthood's annual report. If you don't know where Planned Parenthood annual report is, guess what? We have it posted on our website. You go there and you just look at the data. You look at that out of every single year, they do about 6,000 abortions right here, right down the street, here in our local community. Recently, they thought that they would be funny and throw those numbers in with a bunch of other things. So it's really hard to determine how many abortions they currently are doing because they decided to be arbitrary in their numbers. But out of those 6,000 abortions, they've only referred 97 girls off somewhere else for an adoption. And absolutely 0 mammograms. For whatever reason, the Planned Parenthood president says, hey, if we don't have Planned Parenthood, women are going to die from cancer because they don't have access to mammograms. And all around the country, they do 0 mammograms per year. And without this data, you cannot articulate your pro-life convictions properly. Number 3, generosity. Actually, to articulate this a little bit better, I would like you to do one thing for me. Just stand up for me today. I'd like everyone to reach their hand up as high as you can. Okay? Is everyone doing it as high as they can? Good. All right, now I'd like you to do is just reach just a little bit higher. Okay, perfect. All right, you guys can sit down. You notice what just happened? Is that for the first few moments of that, you said, oh, that's kind of a really silly exercise. And okay, fine, I'll put my hand up, great. But then I asked you to go just a little bit further. And guess what? As I looked up, everyone went up about another ½ of an inch. So as you think about generosity, think about that extra ½ of an inch. That extra little bit you have inside of yourself that you don't even know that is there. But what I'm asking you to do is push just a little bit further than you've ever pushed before when it comes to your faith, when it comes to abortion. And push just a little bit further. Be generous in your time. You know, my staff is mostly here. Some of them are actually on the sidewalk right now, impacting girls as they drive into that abortion facility. We are ready to push through. We see 480 hours of prayer on this sidewalk, and another 480 hours of prayer in St. Peter's, because we thought, why not make more work for ourselves, right? So now we are doing 2 40 Days for Life campaigns, which is prayer and fasting, peaceful vigil, and grassroots community outreach to bring an end to abortion right here in our community. And so these 2 different locations, 480, what does that make? 960, I'm assuming, hours of prayer. Myself, first and foremost, I'm committed to every single one of those prayers. Unfortunately, I can't be in 2 places at one time. So I've gathered a team around me of some amazing people who are ready and willing to give it all to be out there. But guess what? They need help too. They need you to go out there and give it your all. If you thought, well, maybe I'll give them 1 hour, right? Guess what? You've got at least another half hour, right? Because you reached. I challenge you to take all 40 hours. 40 days, make it a 40-hour challenge. I challenge you to be generous in your time. And second of all, I ask you to be generous in your funds. None of this money that we have, none of these resources, none of this that we have ourselves is really ours to begin with. We live in a world, in fact, in a country where the poorest of the poor in the United States are still well above the par for the world. And so as we look around us, God has really touched His hand on the United States, on the Christian community right here in St. Louis, and said, you guys have an opportunity to do so much more. And so I ask you to be generous in your funds and put them where you believe it's the best impact. Yes, you can give them to the Coalition for Life, and we'll do everything we possibly can to make those as impactful as possible. But if there's other places you can put it, then by all means put it there. And lastly, I ask you to evangelize. So prayer, study, generosity, and evangelization. If we stay here in this room, if we stay among those people who love and cherish us, or at least who have the same mindset as us, guess what? We're never going to grow. We're still going to be fighting this abortion crisis for years and years and years on end. Even if we're right with God, we haven't shared that message with anyone else. And so I ask you today to push out of your comfort zone and talk to that one person who needs to hear about this message. Now, I worked in an engineering firm for about 6 years as I got out of college. And the one topic that eventually I was more passionate about than anything else was the abortion topic. And I said, yes, we need to be talking about this. But guess where I never talked about the abortion crisis? At work. You know, work is about, what's the latest software that we need to learn? What are these other things that we need to do? How big is your hard drive? Because mine's so much bigger than yours. Right? Got my little propeller hat on. But no, what we need to do is, whether or not we're at work, at church, I'll tell you what, as many Christians are getting abortions as non-Christians are getting abortions. So when you go to church, you need to be talking to the people there as well and letting them know about this abortion crisis. Because you've already done the study. You're already ready because you've done the study and you know the abortion statistics. You know about Planned Parenthood. You know when life begins. And in fact, one recent story just came out yesterday. There's a video of Planned Parenthood's CEO, Cecile Richards. Anyone ever heard of Cecile Richards? Apparently she has 3 children. I had no idea that she had children. But the interviewer interviewed Cecile and said, "When does life begin?" Just point blank, just like that. When does life begin? And she stumbles a little bit. She's a pretty well put together speaker, I must say. And she stumbles. She says, "Well, I don't know if it's relevant for this conversation." Relevant? For the abortion conversation? When does life begin? That's the question about the abortion crisis. And she doesn't think it's relevant? This interviewer pushes her just a little bit further and says, "Well, okay, if it's not relevant, what do you think?" And she says, "Well, I don't know, it's going to be something we're going to be debating for centuries on end until we have some level of proof." And he pushes her one more time and says, "Well, okay, what do you think?" And at this point, she really pauses and looks inside of herself, and she struggles. Because intellectually, she needs to be on a consistent path. Because if you want to justify abortion, you cannot say that life begins any time before birth. And so intellectually, she is leading this humongous organization, international organization, and intellectually, she knows that she needs to be consistent with this message. But she struggles, and she talks about her children. And she says, "I have 3 beautiful children who I love. And you see there, and you know that there's something inside of her that's struggling. That's her conscience. That's something inside of her that's saying that something that she's about to say is absolutely wrong. Because I know that when my wife was pregnant with our 3 children, there was bouncing around in that little belly there. And there's certainly life in there. But Cecile denied the life of her children as she carried the 3 children and said, "I guess life began for them when they were born." Now I would say if you evangelize, the first thing you must say is that this is a choice. This is a choice for everyone. And I'll tell you what, every time I go out and I talk to different people, I say, I'm 100% pro-choice. Why not? The thing is, we don't want to pressure anyone into the abortion. We want to give them a choice. And guess what? In the United States of America, it is legal to have an abortion. It is legal to take the human life inside of you. Legal to do so. And so you want to meet that person where they're at and say, "Yes, I know it's legal, and it is absolutely your choice. But I know there's a better choice for you." And it's been the choice of the nation over the last 41 years now to choose legalized abortion. But there's another choice out there. In fact, there's 2 other choices. You can carry this child to term and parent this child, or you can carry this child to term and hold this child for adoption, which is a beautiful sacrifice. Both of these choices are putting yourself right with God. The other choice only brings years of despair and years of regret. And so I ask you, as you evangelize out there, and you set yourself with prayer, you set yourself with study, generosity, and evangelizing, that you go out with a message that meets them exactly where they're at. Because through your pro-life journey, and I certainly had my own pro-life journey, my wife and I one night sat around a table, not a table, but we sat around in the living room. And I was really apathetic about the whole pro-life viewpoint. I had been bombarded by the secular culture so much. And my wife was standing there, and she was in tears. Because she was much further along in her pro-life journey than I was. I was just kind of at the infant stages. And so what I would ask is that you remember that journey that you've gone through. remember that one day, or at one point, you quite didn't see that ultrasound. And as I became a parent, I mean, it was really apparent that life begins at conception. And so today I ask you, as we go out, to remember the 3 points of the 40 Days for Life campaign. 40 days of prayer and fasting, 40 days of peaceful vigil, and 40 days of grassroots community outreach to bring an end to abortion right here in the local community. So I ask you to keep going, be fervent in your resolve, and one day we will see an end to abortion here in St. Louis area. God bless you guys.